in 1986, Mikhail Gorbachev was instrumental in revolutionizing the trajectory in history of the Soviet Empire when he, along with others, really engineered what became known as perestroika and glasnost. It was such a radical change, and in a sense the old empire disintegrated, so that implications for Eastern, Central Europe, for the southern republics from Azerbaijan in the west to Kyrgyzstan in the east, but also for the satellite countries like Mongolia and that kind of thing. At that time, we had worked very closely with people in Afghanistan, with the International Assistance Mission of Afghanistan, and also with the United Mission to Nepal. Now, both of these were cooperative groups. You could only get into Afghanistan or into Nepal in those days to work in those countries as a Christian group if you were part of this unified effort. And we did a lot of work with them. They knew about our work, and they came to us in 1989, 3 years after perestroika and glasnost, and said, we're going to have a mess on our hands in Mongolia, just like we have on our hands right now in the Soviet Union, because in the Soviet Union with perestroika and glasnost, all these Christian organizations came rushing in there, and they just, the KGB is watching, the Orthodox Church is watching, everybody's mad, and they're just kind of chaotic situation. Many good things happened, but it was a problem. So they said, we really need to avoid this, because no one has been able to get into Mongolia for 75, 80 years. At that moment, there were only 2 Christian expatriates in the entire country of Mongolia. One was an eccentric British linguist, and the other was a Finnish woman journalist. There were only 4 known believers in the entire country. This is Outer Mongolia, which has always been a sovereign, separate nation. Inner Mongolia is a province of China. They were talking about Outer Mongolia. So they said, would you help us do this? So we had to do the research, and we got an initial list of people who were interested in Mongolia, because there was nobody who had ever been in the country. A few big game hunters, from the West would pay $100,000 and going through China or something. That was the extent of it. So we found a few people, started getting more names, and we actually wound up going to meet with the heads of 15 or 16 different ministries in 9 different countries. This is not like driving across or taking a taxi or a cab across Cairo or across New York or Los Angeles or something, for a 2-hour coffee. This is like getting on a plane and flying to Finland, or flying to Australia or to Holland to meet one guy, and you don't know how he's going to react. This is high stakes stuff, friends. This is not easy. Because everybody has their reasons why they haven't worked together and why they feel the way they do, and that's all. A great deal of it is absolutely legitimate. And in meeting with all these people from all these different countries, we found some really, really, really unsettling stuff. What we found was that there were broken relationships among believers. You remember, this was coming out of the old days of the Soviet Union, where secrecy and cloak and dagger stuff and smuggling this and smuggling that and all this kind of, voice of the martyrs and all this horrific persecution stuff. So it was particularly the Europeans were really concerned about turf and about who was doing what and about keeping secrets, and a lot of efforts to try to bring people had frequently foundered or gone down because of security issues. They simply didn't want to meet. In fact, I remember going to one meeting where there were like 15 people in the room, and everyone in the room except 2 people used a pseudonym. Can you imagine that? This is not writers who are writing clandestine things against the government. These are people meeting face to face. You don't even know who you're talking to. It was that bizarre. Anyway, that was the environment. So there was a lot of broken relationships and terrible slander and libel and things about fellow believers. And people would say, well, if you're going to have a meeting about Mongolia and he comes into the room, I'm not going to be there. Or if he shows up, I'm going to get on the plane and fly back home. So that was the environment. It was not exactly what you'd call real encouraging and real compelling. The need was obvious. Finally, after 18 months and spending $40,000 and airplane bills and taxis and stuff. We called a meeting at the old Salisbury Road YMCA in Hong Kong, down by the Star Ferry. This was the old one before they did this wonderful remodeling job a few years ago. And we got there 2 or 3 days before I had to do the preparation. And during those 2 to 3 days, my wife and I were there. Now I'm an old journalist. I am very skeptical about many things. But I will tell you straight out, we had the most terrifying, demonic manifestations of satanic power day and night, particularly at night, in our room those 3 days. Absolutely spine-chilling, blood-curdling, terrifying things going on. And when we went into the meeting, I had brought a friend who will go unnamed, who was a very well-known international Christian leader and who had a great gift at reconciliation, restoration. I asked him to bring a team of people, and we had a prayer group all around the world praying 24/7. Again, I don't understand, what you may think about these things. Again, understand, I come from a Presbyterian background, and I'm a journalist by background. So when I use this kind of terminology, I'm not using it loosely. We had people, literally, because we had these encounters, we had people praying the blood of Christ over the YMCA, because we're just in hand-to-hand combat with darkness. I mean, this is really terrifying stuff. And sure enough, we had 74 people show up from all these different ministries from all over the world, and we had one Mongolian believer, because as I said, there were 4 in the country. We got one of them to come to this meeting. Well, the meetings went on for 3 nights and 4 days, and during the day we ran, in the morning from 8:30 for prayers and so forth till 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night. And then because of all of these broken relationships, every night from around 9 or 9:30 at night until 4 or 5 the next morning, we had teams of people meeting with these people in broken relationships, praying with them, talking with them, doing reconciliation. Now, these are senior Christian leaders. And I'm absolutely convinced the only reason we were able to kind of restart every morning was because there had been enough progress during the night. And when we came to the end, 3.5 days, despite all this brokenness and terrible stuff that had gone on, they felt, yes, they'd identified enough things to validate the need to go forward. In fact, this group identified 3 issues, and they wanted to put a task force together around each of these 3 issues. And a denomination, God bless them, offered to loan a guy to be a facilitator, a guy and his wife, and we trained him. And for 3 years, we had to continue to have the annual working meetings for this partnership in Hong Kong. And then finally, the 4th year, as the country began to open up and the security situation began to change, and some believers started coming to Christ, within a very comparatively short period of time, they decided they'd move the meetings into Ulaanbaatar. Some of you now know we have never written anything about this work. We can't write about this. When you do partnership work, you have to be a neutral, honest broker. It means very low profile. You never write about what you do. You don't do publicity about what you do. But you have to provide this service as a kind of honest third party. Well, as a result, there's been a lot written, but we've never written anything about this. But there's a book out called The Miracle of Mongolia, and there have been videos done, and there are all kinds of things that have been done to document the story of what God has done there. And it's been an amazing thing. And I think there are 75 to 100. Some people say 150,000, 200,000 believers. I don't know what the right number is, but we've gone from 4. Let's say it's 75,000. We've gone from 4 to 75,000 believers in less than 1 generation in a country that had been totally closed for 1,900 years. Genghis Khan. When it's a Tibetan Buddhist nation is what it is. That's historically it's what it is. When the Dalai Lama went to Ulaanbaatar, now about 5 years ago, he had the largest crowd he has ever had at any public attendance anywhere in the world. Not in India, not in China, in Mongolia. So that's the kind of context that we were in there. And I think what happened was that from the very beginning, for example, the national believers saw the expatriate people from all over the world, Latinos and people in the Middle East, and Indians and Filipinos, Americans and Brits, working together. They said, because as soon as the partnership began working in the country, moving its annual meeting, all the emerging believers were invited into the partnership. And instead of doing communion, they had the famous yak milk ceremony. That was a little challenging for some of the people. But they saw them working together, and from the very beginning, the World Evangelical Fellowship had been involved in those annual meetings. And I think that it was the earliest that in the history of a church being developed in the country, I think it was the earliest that a national fellowship of evangelical believers has ever been formed. And that happened, I think, within 4 or 5 years after that very first meeting in Hong Kong. And that happened because, the WEF was conscious and intentional, and they played a low-key but always present role. They were willing to listen to and talk to and encourage the nationals, and because the nationals saw that it was possible to work together. Did it mean there's just one single denomination in Mongolia today? No. Wouldn't that be wonderful if that was the case? But, you had Pentecostals, you had Assemblies of God, you had Presbyterians, you had people from all kinds of denominational backgrounds, Baptists, in this partnership. And their people paid for these schools or paid for these hospitals. And so, but there is a mechanism for the Mongolians to talk, work, and pray together. And I think we look back now and we say that terrific satanic opposition was a prelude to similarly remarkable breakthroughs. I think any place that has been held by Satan for hundreds and hundreds of years, or 1,000 years or more, I mean, what do you expect? Do you think it's going to be easy? He's just going to open up, Satan's going to open up the door and say, walk in? No. He's going to do everything possible to destroy the witness of Christ. And the place he always starts, first, the most obvious place, is destroy the relationships among the believers. And it neutralizes. That's why Jesus, of course, says, I pray they may all be one, so that the world will know that you are the one who sent me.